Continuing education knows that at the end of the day, students want to graduate, and we can help them do that because we really listen to their needs, and we can offer them flexible options both within continuing education and across the campus.
We don't take a cookie cutter approach. We realize each student comes with their own story. So whether it's a part-time student looking to complete a degree program or someone just looking for online courses, we're there to connect them to the resources of the university.
Good morning, and thank you for showing up. I'm delighted to see a full house. Thank you for joining us at the 78th Annual Conference on World Affairs. My name is Mark Gross. They asked me to insert my title and affiliation. I'll tell you a little about that in a minute, but first, for recording purposes, today's date is Thursday, April 16th, 2026. It is 11 a.m., and our panel title today is Artificial Intelligence. A little bit about me. I'm Mark Gross. I'm a professor of computer science here at the University of Colorado Boulder and the director of the Atlas Institute, where we do all kinds of things at the intersections of people, technology, art, science, and engineering. I won't say more about that now, but if you're curious, I invite you to visit our expo tomorrow afternoon at 3:30, and I've left a few flyers at the back table. And if you want to know more, ask me later. So before we get started, let me read the University of Colorado Boulder's land acknowledgement. It's a little long, bear with me. You may have heard it before in other sessions. The University of Colorado Boulder, Colorado's flagship university, honors and recognizes the many contributions of indigenous peoples in our state. CU Boulder acknowledges that it is located on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, and many other Native American nations. Their forced removal from these territories has caused devastating and lasting impacts. While the University of Colorado Boulder can never undo or rectify the devastation wrought on indigenous peoples, we commit to improving and enhancing engagement with indigenous peoples and issues locally and globally. So we will do this by recognizing and amplifying the voices of indigenous CU Boulder students, staff, and faculty and their work, educating, conducting research, supporting student success and integrating indigenous knowledge, consulting, engaging, and working collaboratively with tribal nations to enhance our ability to provide access and culturally sensitive support, and to recruit, retain, and graduate Native American students in a climate that is inclusive and respectful. So thank you once again, and welcome to the Conference on World Affairs and today's discussion. I'm still reading boilerplate, bear with me for another moment. We ask that all attendees remain respectful throughout the discussion, refrain from interruptions. Signs, banners, noisemakers, and other audible disruptions are not permitted and will result in those being responsible for being asked to leave. Please silence your phones. So I don't expect that we'll have a rowdy session here, but thank you for being considerate. We'll allot time for questions from our in-person audience, and we'll take your questions via these handwritten note cards. There are 3 producers or facilitators who raise your hands in the back there, and they have cards, so if you have a question, you can write your question and they'll deliver them here and we'll figure out how to respond. So please print legibly, raise your hand if you have a completed card, and a producer will collect it, bring it up here. So, now to begin. Welcome to those present and those participating online. With us today are 3 remarkable panelists from quite different fields: a musician, a filmmaker, and a writer, all who have strong ideas about today's topic, the artist in the age of AI. And I'll let each of them introduce themselves. Elena, Ken, and Seth. I haven't met them before, so this is a thrill for me to find out more about colleagues that I didn't even know existed. So we'll start with self-introductions, and then we'll move on to a panel. We'll leave about 20 minutes at the end for your participation and participation online, and I hope that we can have an active and a virulent discussion. So, Elena, without further ado.
Thank you. Good to see everybody. A lot of people came out. That's so awesome. My name's Elena, and I'm a documentary filmmaker, so I make all different kinds of film, television series, short form, internet videos, you name it. But the thing that draws it all together, it's always real life. It's always documented with utmost care. for preserving some authenticity and some sense of truth. And at the same time, it's also always a construct by nature. So that I deal with that a lot in my work. I am a big technology, in film we use a lot of technology, and I've been using AI, and I'm curious like how many people are using AI actively on a daily basis in here, so like pretty much everybody. How many people are using AI for paid work? Like to help you with like work that you're getting paid to do, it's okay. So it's like a huge thing, and I'm really interested in the promise and the perils. I think that there's an authenticity and a humanity that becomes even more important as AI content becomes more and more out there, and I'm really interested in how I can sort of keep my job by way of always looking for the thing that maybe AI can't make, which for now, at least to me, is that humanity in that thing. But at the same time, I'm using it for things like, pitching, like all the time. We have to write 1 million essays in order to film a frame of footage, and that's never even our end product. So I'm just telling you a little bit of the ways that this is coming into my daily life. And I can't wait to just discuss that with all of you. And the other question I wanted to ask everybody is how many people are doing creative work in general, not paid or unpaid, but like how many people are creators and artists in here? Okay, and how many people, is that your main source of income? Okay, so like really important stuff. And how many people are directly using the AI for the creative work already? Yeah, okay, amazing. So I want to learn just as much from you guys, actually, in general, but that's who I am and where I'm at, and I'm really excited to be here today to talk about all this.
So I'm Ken Liu. I'm a writer and a technologist. I'm super excited to see a lot of students in the audience today because I think all of you are living through just an extraordinary moment. I think unlike a lot of other writers, I'm actually very optimistic about the future of the arts in the age of AI because my general overall argument is that if you look at historical trends where machines ended up taking over parts of human craft, what always happens is the part where machines just do what humans do but faster is not interesting. The part where humans take the machines and then learn to do things they couldn't do before, that part is much more interesting. So my argument overall is living through an age where you're inventing new mediums, that is super exciting. And as a writer, my focus is on that part of it. And so, today my comments will largely be about what I think are the ways that humans will thrive in the age of AI and what are the mediums that humans will learn to use AI for. And I don't think it's actually one of those cases where capitalism won't win and machines will just end up doing what we already do, but faster, cheaper, and slop will overtake everything. I don't think that will happen. But I tend to be an optimist, so we'll see. I've spent many years in the Valley as a technologist. I now still maintain a lot of connections to the Valley, but primarily I write fiction about technology. And if you're interested, probably my most well-known work is a show called Pantheon, which is on Netflix, and it's based on my short fiction, and I worked on it. And I also have novels and other things, and I think a lot about technology and the arts. I've been actually thinking about machines and what they can do to help us create and invent new mediums of art since a quarter of a century ago. And so I'm super excited that this is a moment that we're going through where a lot of the potential is now actually coming to realization. So I'm looking forward to this discussion and learning from you and sharing my thoughts.
Good morning, folks. What a pleasure to be here with these panelists. My name's Seth Schaefer. Before I introduce myself, I just wanted to attempt a live demo. So can I just source from the audience. Is there a particular style of music that anyone wants to shout out? And I'll see if I can do a live demo. Who loves a genre of music? Let's source another one besides Bach fugue. Something that's more, yeah. Classical. Again, can we do something that's a bit more popular and beat-driven? I heard hip-hop. So I'm going to try that.
Okay, let's try hip-hop.
Okay. So. That was extraordinary. Yeah. All right, so I'm baking something right now, and we'll come back to it. So my name is Seth Schaefer, and I just want to start by saying I love technology and art, and I love making art with technology and about technology. For over 10 years, I've been making music using algorithms, often originally designed to generate what I've often called pseudo-intelligent outputs. I want to make it clear that I support technology in the arts before what I'm about to do now, which is describe the current state of what most people think of when they think of AI and music. So just to give us a lay of the land, the first song to go viral with 15 million views using generative AI was in April 2023. And by November that same year, the technology was so normalized that you have mainstream groups, I even hesitate saying mainstream, but like the Beatles, releasing music that's using that same technology. So by November, it's completely normalized. Despite the initial sort of, I would call it symbolic pushback by groups like the Grammys and ongoing suits and big deals or backdoor deals with big record companies, industry experts estimate that today about 39% of the music uploaded daily to music services are now fully AI generated. Not partially, but fully, 39%. Of that music that is then being streamed, 85% of the streams of that AI-generated music are thought to be fraudulently generated by streaming farms. So it's people paying for more streams. The outputs of these AI songs are based on the illegal scraping of every accessible audio file on the internet. Every file is taken illegally. The biggest AI company that's doing this is called Suno.ai, and their annual revenue as of, I think, last month was reported at 300 million with 2 million paying subscribers. The CEO of that company, his name's Mikey Schulman, said, "It's not really enjoyable to make music now. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of practice. You need to get really good at an instrument or really good at a piece of production software. I think the majority of people don't enjoy the majority of the time spent making music." Ooh. Obviously, there's a lot of pushback against that, but I just wanted to tell you, as of 3 days ago, as recently as 3 days ago, I should say, there are major artists like Diplo coming out and supporting this view, saying, and I quote, "If you're a creative, you need to adapt or just give up and become an Uber driver." No shade to Uber drivers, right? But I feel like that. Okay, at the same time, other non-music AI companies are laying the groundwork for outputs from these technologies to be protected as a form of protected speech under the First Amendment, essentially establishing a backdoor precedent for AI personhood, like legal personhood, which by extension would allow these original musical ideas stolen from every musician with music on the internet to be repackaged through a predictive model, uploaded by the tens of thousands daily, copyrighted by a digital entity with legal personhood status, with streaming revenue redirected by the manipulation of an algorithm. This is anti-human. I think we could all agree, right? This is anti-art, honestly. So I have lots of thoughts. That was a very cynical thought. I'll share today in the context of the panel that I can push back against myself on that a bit. Let's see if this generated our result for us. It didn't, so I'm gonna play you something that was in the style of like country, I guess. This was fed a prompt that was copy-pasted from the CWA website with our bios and the prompt for today. And so we'll play like a minute and a half of it. Let's see. Let's try this one. Oh no, the demo's failing.
The robots don't want to collaborate, I guess.
Close out, robots.
Maybe if you had given them a nicer intro.
I know. That was a rough intro.
Yeah, the robots heard you, and they were like, we're not working today.
It's okay. All right. Well, you'll have to forgive me for that. You're not missing out. I think it's on the one hand extremely fascinating, and I think utterly devastating. So I'll give you that. And actually, I'm actually really pleased that didn't work because I don't want to give Suno any more credit than they're due. So thank you.
Carry on.
I guess I'll start by talking about my thoughts on this. So for most writers, I think the advent of AI is extremely fearful and negative. The reaction is very negative, and it's totally understandable. This idea that AI is going to be replacing human writers is premised on this fundamental assumption that writers do what they do not because they actually enjoy it, but because they just want the result. So this whole idea that musicians don't really actually enjoy making music, this is actually fairly common in the way a lot of technology people think about the arts. They view the arts as a matter of producing a product that will please the audience. And so the very process of making the product is just a part of the unfortunate process of capitalism where labor is required. And the logic of capitalism is always to eliminate labor. And so if we can figure out a way to get machines to do what human artists do, then everybody should be happy in a purely capitalist sense. This is obviously a very flawed view of what art is actually about. But I think it provides a bit of an insight into how I think AI and arts will play out. So I just want to be clear that the part that Seth was talking about where these models are trained on stolen work, including my own work, and that the artists are not compensated for their work being taken into these models, that part is a real problem. But I don't view that problem as fundamentally unsolvable. That's one of those legal issues that can be solved, probably not to the satisfaction of individual artists like us, but to the satisfaction of the copyright holders, which is not the same thing, right? But it will be solved, I think. It either will be solved in a way that we are somewhat happy so we get some money, or it will be solved in a way where Congress just says that's the way it is. But regardless, it will be solved. So I'm not saying that part is not important, but I want to just bypass it. I want to say, let's assume we're living in a world in which that particular objection of stolen material has been overcome. Now, we have these models. What can we do with them? My overall thought is this. There are some places where the use of AI models will never be interesting and it will never amount to anything. And what I mean by that is the type of thing where humans create because we're actually interested and we're not interested in fulfilling someone's desire. These models are best thought of as two things. One is a new way of seeing the world, so pattern detectors, and the other is to see them as desire fulfillment machines. That's what these machines are really good at. So in the parts of the arts where desire fulfillment matters, I think they will make a lot of headway. I would not be surprised, for example, if in the future you will see the emergence of something I call Scheherazade novels. What are Scheherazade novels? They're novels written for an audience of one. Okay, you see this all the time in the fanfic community. Somebody post saying, I would love to read a piece of Harry Potter fanfic starring a main character who's like me. These are the ships I want, and these are the things I want to happen in it. And here's the resolution I want. Okay, somebody write it for me. Most of the time, no one is going to do that because we humans don't write to please one person. We just don't do that. Maybe if you're a king, you can do it, Scheherazade, right? But Scheherazade novels will be a thing in the age of AI. I think people will go out there and say, this is what I want. I want a Mary Sue novel about me. Write it for me. And machines will do it. These are not things humans will ever do. This is about fulfilling a desire. So if you've read Stephen King's Misery, you know what I'm talking about. Annie asking Paul to write that novel for me. That's what's going to happen, okay? So that's a genre in which AI will take over, and humans, well, we don't do that anyway, so who cares? But a lot of us write novels not because we don't enjoy the process, and not because we want to be famous, and not because we want to make money. We want to make something because we feel compelled to make that thing. That the machines will never take away. So I think what's going to happen is humans who are interested in creating things, not to fulfill someone's desire, but to just fulfill their own desire to make that thing. AI will never amount to anything in that area. So I think that's a good way to sort of distinguish between the parts where AI will make an impact and where they won't. Is it about fulfilling someone's desire or not?
I mean, I think the same thing is happening or will happen, what you described about individualized reading. I think that will happen with film and series as well. I've already heard from people who, as a documentary filmmaker, you get to interview and talk with a lot of people, and I've definitely heard that the future contains like personalized television where it's you and your friends going to do the thing. And I think that what we also crave as audiences is the thing that we didn't even know that we wanted. And that's the part that historically forever the executives in the business world have never been able to accurately predict. And so it makes me wonder, like, if AI will be able to predict that, or if it will still be that thing that just happens and hits at the right time for the right reason, and it's what everybody didn't even know they needed. And that's like the collective experience of art could maybe exist on the side of the individualized experience of art, where sometimes you want to read your own personalized novel, but sometimes you want to be part of a cultural moment. And they might both be able to exist, I hope.
I'm sure they will both exist. Yeah, I'm absolutely convinced that these personalized novels will not displace all of reading, and just like those personalized TV shows will not displace all filmmaking. I'm sure we can coexist, and we feel very different aesthetic preferences.
I would push back just a little bit on this idea of, so setting aside this like kind of personalized thing, you talked about art and the process like within, like the inner desire for human beings as creators. Like we have this urge to create. And I just worry because the tools are so incredibly, like every day they improve to the point of making like our own urges just obsolete, right? So I wonder if there's a bit of, so there's this woman who's written a couple books about education and recently has talked a bit about AI and its impact on education. Her name's Rebecca Winthrop, and she talked about, you might know her, she kind of made the rounds for this idea of students entering what she called explorer mode. I don't know if that kind of lands with anybody, but she talked about the use of AI in teaching and it breaking down this trust between teachers and students. And what was emerging from this lack of trust was this idea of cognitive offloading, which I think for us who are seasoned, fully formed adults, we certainly, and I'm thinking of many of the people who raised their hands earlier, it said, yes, I'm confident enough to like raise my hand and say, yes, I do use AI. I know all of you are using AI, right? But if you're confident enough to raise your hand and say, yes, I am, and even more confident to say, in my professional work, I am using it, we're using that ideally as this idea of cognitive offloading. We're pushing tedious tasks, repetitive tasks, towards the machine, which it is good at doing that, and saving the curatorial and creative executive choices for us, right? And I could speak of how I've done that on my own work, but the real fear is with people who are not fully formed and are in the education system learning to become artists or want to be artists and they're young, there's this potential for cognitive stunting, is what Rebecca Winthrop calls it. And I would go ahead and just extend that to like creative stunting, that the shortcuts are there and they are extremely powerful and we are entranced by them, and it's incredibly hard to break that temptation.
Seth, you're absolutely right. Now, if I can push back on you a little bit, I think there is actually historically a lot of examples for how we overcome that. So if you think about historically how human craft get displaced by machines, there's always this period during which there's no craft until people put craft back into it. What I mean by that is this. If you practice any kind of art, you know what I'm talking about. The pleasure of the creation process comes from practicing a craft, meaning it's something hard. You have to learn how to do. If it's too easy, you derive no pleasure from it because you have no control and you're not shaping anything and you're not making anything, okay? So historically, when the camera was first invented, there was no craft to it. You point the box and you click a button and you wait. That's why photography was not seen as an art, right? But over time, people learned how to use this thing to actually create art. You learn to control exposure, you learn how to pose, you learn how to frame, you learned the language of cinema. That's the key, right? I don't know how many of you know this, but when the motion picture camera was first invented, the inventors, the Lumiere brothers, thought of it as a scientific instrument. They saw no entertainment value in it whatsoever. And the earliest uses were just pointing the camera at a stage and filming people putting on a play. It took decades before the language of cinema was invented and people realized how to use this machine to practice craft, to make something actually interesting. AI is in that early stage of the camera's history, right? Where all you can do is talk to it and tell it to do something. Now, for Hollywood executives, this is indistinguishable from what they do normally anyway. So they think this is art. I'm sure you know this. A lot of Hollywood executives think of themselves as artists, where they give notes, and that's the same thing as being an artist. But we know it's not. It's just not. And today's AI tools are so primitive. There's no craft to it. You tell it what you want, and then you have no control over anything. But I don't think it's going to be like that always. I think we will end up learning how to have the affordances and the tools to actually use AI in a way that requires craft. So Seth, the answer to you is this age of typing something in and have it generate videos of, some powerful authoritarian person, living out his fantasy, that is not going to last. This is not the end-all be-all of AI generation. We will go into a place where AI will actually require craft, and then art will come back into it.
Thank you, Ken. Yes.
I don't know. I think I love the optimism of that. And for myself and my own artistic practice, 100%. But I just want to say, I do still withhold some worry that there's going to be a generational loss of an appreciation for process and how process in itself yields the artwork. That the artwork is going through the fire and finding your way through that. And that the shortcuts are so extremely tempting that it sort of burns the bridge. I'll give you just a couple. I don't have the quotes in front of me, but the folks who are running a lot of these AI music generators are likening it. They're gamifying it, right? They've talked about how music should be as fun as pulling up and playing Fortnite. Right? And I think it's an interesting comparison because there's an immediacy to playing a game, a lack of true commitment to that. You just pop in. It's a form of like self-guided entertainment, right? I've never played Fortnite, true admission. But like you do something in that game, right? And then it's of your own kind of volition and it's an immediate gratification. But then, how does that translate to this idea of process and finding what is truly like idiomatic to this incredibly powerful tool? And I think that's what we're advocating up here on the most positive side of this, is that the best thing that can come from this is new idiomatic forms that we couldn't have imagined before. And yes, we want that so badly, but I just worry about the damage in getting there, the damage that is already happening right now to even my own understanding. Here's just a quick anecdote. I'm teaching a songwriting class to students who want to be the next generation of pop stars, and they are working on that craft day in and day out. And man, through the struggle, they are coming up with some really fascinating songs that are so incredibly personal and are very unique to them. And when I return back home on Monday, I'm going to show them how this tool can outstrip any song that they write by the stroke of the keyboard. It's going to have a better hook. It's going to have more clever lyrics. And so there's a real conundrum here, because that product and I truly think it is a product, that product that we've just gamified and spat out, not just one version, but like literally 4 versions at the click of a button, would, by all accounts, do better on a radio-ready performance than anything that they could write at this moment. So it does undermine, I guess, like this trajectory of what we would say is like 20th and 21st century sort of like art practice. And I don't know, I hope we get to this point of idiomatic uses, but anyway, not to just dwell on this, but I'm just curious, like, how do you, in the optimistic sense, like, what is idiomatic about AI? Like you talked, Ken, about like this idea of new uses, like new forms of things in your areas. I can think of things for music, but I'd love to know about like any thoughts of what's idiomatic about it.
I'll just add a few quick things that I've seen from people that are actually interesting. So one of the things that AI can do is to serve as a kind of new lens of looking at the world. So think of AI as a microscope or a telescope. So I've seen some artists who do things like train their own model on different linguistic corpora and then making interesting artistic artifacts out of that. So for example, training your own custom model on the transcripts of CNN reporting, and then training a different model on the transcripts of Fox News reporting, and then getting into the embedding of these linguistic usages and then tracing a path between the word America and the word Mexico and see how these two models give you a completely different path. That is incredibly interesting to me as a way to re-examine our world. So that's one example. Another example about AI idiomatic use would be incredibly interesting uses of AI as a way to reflect on who you are. So basically a scenario that the user engages with, but the real point of it is to ultimately reflect on who you are rather than what the story being told by the model is. This is extremely experimental, and the problem is current AI tools are just not well designed enough to give the creator affordances to do that. But I think in the future will be. So 2 examples.
Elena, before we got together in the panel, you said some things about the most effective pieces of film that you make are those that involve real people and spontaneous interaction. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I, like many people in my industry, have been experiencing a lot of complicated factors that are leading to loss of work. So, for example, the media conglomerations, the attack on DEI and truthful, factual storytelling and documentary, the lack of funding, the intense amount of things being made about true crime and celebrities, the writer's strike, COVID, there's a lot of things going on in storytelling right now, if you're a visual storyteller. So I was 5 months with no work last year, and I was like, what's going on? What am I competing with? Like, I need to figure this out. So I started trying to figure out social media, like a lot of people, by doing it myself. And I tried to do all the things. I understand, I'm a storyteller, I understand hooks, I understand engagement, and then as I started doing it, I realized that I actually started to have access to analytics that had previously been gatekept for me in my position by every single network and executive, because at my level of where I was in my craft, that information would not be privy to me as a work for hire or et cetera. So suddenly, for the first time, I had real data about when my audience was engaging, when they were turning away, and what this all meant. And it felt like things started to click. Like all of the stuff that I learned in screenwriting class, in film school, all of the stuff that I had been practicing now was real, and I could see it firsthand. Then, evolving, I'm like, okay, but what's me about it? Okay, now I figured it out, but what's gonna be me about it? What's my artist take on this? How does it fit into what I do? What I do is I specialize in seeing real life scenarios play out, talking to people and understanding how to tell that story in the most compelling way possible. Usually it's around people that inspire me, but often it has to do with authentic human connections that happen in real life that might inspire others to sort of just introduce themselves to somebody in the most basic sense, right? And I started posting just videos of spontaneous things that were happening in my life, like literally, it started, this is like a whole tangent, but like a street cart situation where I'm waiting for my breakfast sandwich and I see a bus pull up and the street cart worker hands out the window of the back of the street cart to the bus driver his sandwich without him even having to get out of the bus, without her having to get out of the street cart. Like the whole scenario in New York City just unfolded in front of my eyes and I'm like, that's the most New York City thing I ever saw. So I grabbed my phone and I walked 2 steps away and I was like, I just saw the most New York City thing that I ever saw in my entire life. And I told the whole story and it had like 300,000 views, like it was crazy and all this interaction. And I was like, what was it about that? Like, what was it about that just hit? And I'm like, it was because it was a completely random interaction between all of these strangers that just clicked. And when I asked the woman in the cart, how long has that been going on? She goes, 2 years. You know what I mean? So it was like this whole relationship of humanity had unfolded, and my job as a documentary filmmaker was to notice it, and then to not let it go by, and then to not be afraid to share that. And so once I realized that and it clicked for me, I kept applying that model, and it has literally only been a couple of weeks. This is like so brand new, but I can just see that everything about it has gone up in terms of how people are valuing it, how people are engaging with it, how much people are sharing with it. And it made me realize that the audience is still who this is all for, and what they need is still something that as creatives is our job to try and provide if we want our work to be consumed. And instead of thinking about what does the algorithm want, I started thinking about what does my audience want, and what do I have to give them that could help with whatever it is that they need. And I realized it's like real life human interactions is what people need to be seeing and doing more of. And I'm just like so happy to be, continuing to do that. And it feels like very mushy because I used AI to figure out, like I had to use the analytics to figure out the thing that I was gonna crack that was gonna be really meaningful. So I don't know, that's the journey right now. It's literally happening like right now as we speak.
I mean, if I can add a little bit to that, Elena, I think what you pointed out is something super important, and I want to make sure the young artists here understand that. When Elena's talking about what the audience wants, that is not the same thing as what the audience desires in the sense of an algorithm. These are very different things. Sometimes we don't know what we want. We just want that sense of connecting with another human being, another consciousness. That is what human artists can do. That is not what machines can do. That's one of the biggest differences. And Seth, your point earlier about young artists feeling, overwhelmed. I know exactly what you're talking about. I've had students who come to me and say, I don't know how I can keep on writing because the machine writes better than I do. And I'm very sad to hear that because I feel like when you're starting out in the arts, it's very hard to not let the perfection or the smoothness of the result become deceptive. Yes, the machine may generate a piece of music that sounds good. Maybe by some metrics, that thing will be more popular, but it's not going to have you in it. It's not going to have that thing that Lena was talking about that makes it a thing that your audience didn't know they wanted. I mean, this is a very personal moment. When I was writing this epic fantasy series, there was this moment where I was writing a very long scene involving basically, not to put too fine a point on there, Iron Chef in an epic fantasy setting, okay? I wrote that and it was crazy, it was ridiculous. I was like, no one will want this, but I kind of just want it. I'm gonna put it out there. And one of my most favorite remarks are readers who came to me afterwards and said, I had no idea I wanted to see this thing, and the idea is so stupid, and yet after reading it, I want this, I want this. That's what it is, this human thing that we don't understand why we do what we do, and yet we make these connections. That's what machines will never do. So I tell my students, Machines will never do that Iron Chefing epic fantasy thing because it's not been done before, and they're not trained on it, and they're not going to think that audiences will want this. But you want this, so put it out there, and people will want it. That's what's special. So I want to encourage all of you who are artists to remember this, that the machines may be smoother and look more, polished, but that does not mean they are better than you. And if you're a human artist, try to push yourself in directions that will emphasize your humanness, in the same way that visual artists, after the invention of the camera, moved away from strict representationalism. Learn from that and take that into heart.
Yeah, I totally agree. What both of you just described are pro-human AI futures, right? They're really centering the human being either as creator or as the audience. I think we crave that, right? I feel like there is a growing pro-human movement, and if you're interested to learn more about that and you don't know where to go, highly recommend the Center for Humane Technology, which is laying the groundwork for understanding what that pro-human future looks like. And I also wanted to just bring up an article I read in Fortune magazine recently that was talking about this incredibly tragic loss of jobs due to AI and automation, and what and perhaps even maybe somebody in your life who's been displaced by this. I certainly do. This idea of having weird jobs as a hedge against being replaced, jobs that, and I forget which CEO of one of the big 5 companies mentioned this, but basically a job where there's not enough data points to do what you do in order to be fully replicable. But I wanted to throw out, just to comment on what you said, Ken, which was this idea of that's a weird idea that you just proposed about that example. And I think that weirdness is it's incredibly human, and that's the part that we crave. And actually, for my own work, I feel that one of the idiomatic things that the machine can do better than me is this was true with the older models, which was this idea of hallucination. It wasn't clean, it wasn't smooth, it was giving you real crazy stuff. And so one of my works from a couple years ago that used a large language model, I trained it on the lyrics of the hyperpop artist Sophie, if you're familiar with her work. She's fantastic. And I fed a large language, I should say a neural network with all of the lyrics from Sophie, and I said, give me more in this style. And I got millions of words out of that thing. And for night after night, I would just read through it. And most of it was trash. But there were nuggets in there. And as someone who was trying to kind of curate that, I was inspired by what the machine was able to hallucinate. I found that incredibly, it was generating weird stuff, but it couldn't do it on its own, right? It needed me to filter out, I would say, the vast majority, 98% of it was trash. But the good stuff was really good, especially when you link it up, because it has this semblance of humanity, but also, what I'm interested in is this post-digital failure aesthetic that I'm seeking. What is it like to be human, and what is it like to be a machine? And so ultimately, I want to make art for humans, made by humans, but could not be made by humans alone. And so I feel that weird factor, although the quote was dealing with something else, I feel we need to be weird as artists in that way that makes us, I don't know, we gotta seek something that is truly a little grittier, a little messier, to really connect.
Well, I think the story that Elena told a minute ago gets to exactly that essence, that there was something you perceived in that moment that probably would be very difficult for a machine to perceive because it's based on all your experience about humans. I'm going to turn now to, I have a ton of audience questions here. They're really interesting. I want to make sure we have time to get to as many of them as we can. I'm going to ask the panelists to be direct in responding to them, and I think what I'll do is sort of ask individual panelists to talk about this one. So the first one, I'm not even going to ask for a response exactly. It's hilarious. Has Taylor Swift been AI generated this whole time? So several of these questions pertain to the future. And here's one for Elena. So with every culture shift, we see a counterculture emerge. What will the counterculture look like in an age of AI dominance?
I'm obsessed with this question. I love this question. It brings up like so many visuals in my mind. I've never been asked this question before, so I'm really thinking about this for the first time right now. And the visual that it really brings up is just people outside, not with any screens in sight, like as an act of pleasure, but also as an act of resistance. Like, is it going to be an act of resistance to not be on your phone all Saturday or Sunday or for this week or for that week? Is it going to be an act of community to have everyone in a room decide that this is a screenless situation? Is it going to be a trend, which it already is, to go back to non-smartphones? Like, we have options, and I think that we can live in this scenario where the places in the world that are still screenless, off the grid, off signal, like those places in nature have so much value, and they have even so much more value in these scenarios where there's less and less places that you can go to get away from that and really connect with the off-screen world that is in so many more dimensions. Like, literally I've started taking off my headphones when I walk around, because in New York City, everybody's constantly wearing noise-canceling headphones, like, for good reason. It freaking sucks. It's loud as hell. There's horns, there's like ambulances, there's subways, there's people yelling, there's crazy people, you know what I mean? Like, every scenario, it's kind of actually an assault on your senses at any given moment. But then I remember that I'm a filmmaker, and sound is like one of the dimensions that I practice in, and if I'm shutting myself off to that world on a day-to-day basis, like, how am I going to be able to come up with the sound design that perfectly conveys the emotion of the person that I'm trying to express at that time, even in a documentary situation? So to me, it's like, that's the counterculture, and that's something that we can put aside that time. Like, we can set those boundaries around our screen time, and we can decide that there are not 1, 2, or 3 situations, but actually so many situations in which that experience would be made better if it was screenless. And is it even going to be an act of resistance to do something without posting about it, to do something in secret, right? Like, to decide, like, hey guys, like, we're going to go on this whole adventure, and it's going to live and die here, and no one's ever going to know about it, and it's going to be private. Like, that is going to be like what money can't buy, like, that's the experience that people are going to be going crazy over, I think, in the future. Yeah.
All right. Yes, well said. All right, here's one for Ken. Do you envision a rise in an artistic trend like absurdism? With AI models being trained on more common art and patterns, will art become more absurd?
That's certainly a possibility. I mean, the logic behind these models is they have to make money somehow. So the models tend towards the cliched. So if you practice an art that relies on cliches or tropes, or where you think what you do is about fulfilling that sort of tropiness, then yeah, I think models will do better, perhaps in some sense, because if the whole point is whether you can execute the perfect version of that thing that everyone already knows, then machines probably will eventually be able to optimize that and become better at it. But there's no real way to train a model to be weird in the way that we're talking about here. And so in the same way I was talking earlier about how human visual artists move towards abstraction and impressionism and all these other non-representational modes, I think human artists probably will move to be more weird, to directions that are more human, whatever that means, rather than more of the average. I mean, models are great at reproducing the average. There's a reason why a lot of us think we can tell when AI has written something or generated something, because there's a kind of MBA patterness to it, just this kind of very generic, no subjectivity kind of attitude. It's the averaging of everything. And we need to, as human artists, move away from that. I think that's what we're trying to do. I don't think models, so long as they rely on this current technology, can ever really do that, because these models rely on a lot of data, and they rely on generating things that fit the data. So I don't think models can ever be weird in the way that humans can. That's my feeling.
All right. This is a question from Ivy. Ivy, raise your hand. Hi, Ivy. It says, and I'll direct this at Seth, can AI replace those emotions from real art that are evoked from real art? I.e., can it replace our desire to actually create?
That's a great question. I think the scary thing for me is that, as someone who thinks a lot about this and practices in this domain, I would say, for me, no. But I think there's just a large swath of the general public that maybe, right? I think that's why a company like Suno has that many subscribers. These are primarily not musicians that are subscribing. They're people that want to get direct access to emotional content that speaks to them. And I think that there's strong indications that, what emotions really are, a chemical reaction in the brain. And if it can be quantifiably, triggered and reproduced, like any sort of predictable outcome-based algorithm, the machine will outperform us. It will get better at that. And it's been likened to the idea of the machine directly, playing to our brainstem. And so I do worry about that. I think that emotional response can be elicited, perhaps to a greater effect than by humans, by the machine. And I don't know what to do about that. Honestly, I feel like that's super dangerous. Imagine, for example, just to nail it down to something, imagine a future, which I think is extreme, it's now basically, where you, in fact, Suno has a series of commercials. And one of those commercials is a woman who's sitting and she's cutting her hair with scissors and she's crying and she says, "Give me a song about breaking up." And it starts playing this song that is, heartfelt and sad. She says, "Not that kind of breakup." And then it's kind of taking charge of my life, and it's angry, and she's like, "Yeah," right? So it's this idea of we can totally tailor, as we've discussed at some length, things that respond exactly to our emotions, novels that do exactly what we want. I just think that's the reality. I don't think that's the interesting reality. That's not where we want to be. But I don't know how to convince the general public of that. I will say that all these examples that we've been throwing out that are extremely pro-human, they tend to be on smaller scales, person-to-person scales. And for my own take, I feel like the biggest impact I can make is sharing both the positive future and also these cautions, like grayscaling your phone, for example, putting it away, with the people that I interact with, and kind of urging in my small communities to make these kind of rebellious changes to these larger patterns, which I think they have the potential to sweep us away.
This is so interesting. I'm sorry. I'm fascinated by this panel. I can't keep my thought on the questions because I'm listening to the. Here's one for you, Elena. And it's from a student. Aren't we all students here? How do we eliminate the usage of other people's art in the training of AI? Humans themselves learn such things through seeing what others do. How could training AI be different? Or be any different?
I mean, this is the thing, right? This is the crux of what I think we're dealing with as people who make a living with our artistic craft. I don't know that you can. I don't know that you can, because even if they regulated it, like you're saying, all this illegal practice of whatever, it's out there, it's the material's out there. And I think the question is can the human artists find your lane anyway? I don't know, can we, I really don't, I really have concerns. I really think it's messed up. I really think we need to regulate it. At the same time, I don't know that that would matter.
Can I just throw a couple ideas? These are not my own. I'll attribute at least one of them. If you attended the AI panel yesterday at the same time in the other room, Asher J was mentioning this idea of ontological AI as an alternative, just like completely different structured algorithm to generating outputs, and how it's much harder. It's more a credible source based, and a transparent revelation with the output of the use of the source, and that the type of predictive modeling that we're using now is like the cheap, quickest money cash grab possible. Obviously there's tons to say about like its irresponsible uses of resources, and so there are other options that are out there. So I think that's one. And then two, I would also say that like from a kind of a pro-human standpoint, I think this regulation, that you talk about could look like, for example, like a certified organic stamp on all artwork that's on like Spotify. Or Spotify is certainly capable, and Apple Music too, capable of detecting when a user is uploading like literally 5,000 songs a day and saying these have been flagged as AI generated, and just having that as a label that lets you know, sure, we're not going to stop you from listening to it, but you should know like this is where this came from. So sort of source verifying. I think there are
that's
really
a cool idea,
tangible things.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, I'm going to throw this one to you, Ken. I'm excited about the ones that talk about the next generation. So how do you envision AI shaping the way younger generations approach art, going off the idea that effort barrier that leads to AI shortcuts in art?
So my overall view is I think young artists should try to avoid using AI in their own art as much as possible, obviously, because you want to train yourself to learn to practice the craft. And then I think the next step really is about learning AI as a potentially craftable tool, right? I think this is one of the things that I get very frustrated by when I'm talking to the tech companies. They all sort of, they're trapped in this idea that the chat interface is all there is, that all you can ever do with these machines is just to tell it what you want. But that's not what artists want. I don't know how many times I have to emphasize this. If you're an artist, you know that it's not the same thing telling someone else to do something for you versus doing it yourself. It's just not the same. Again, I gotta tell you, executives who give notes are not artists. You cannot pretend to be an artist by telling someone else to do something. What ends up having to happen is these AI companies, if they truly want to make something that will be useful for humans, they have to build in the affordances to allow humans to actually practice craft with these tools. So not just typing in, I want you to do this and in the style of this, but actually practicing art. So maybe as a filmmaker, it means not just describing the scene, but actually being able to move the camera, to position the camera, to actually act out scenes and have the machine imitate you, or some other ways of actually taking the reins of shaping the thing that you're making. I think as young artists in the age of AI, you need to make sure that you push for that and try to figure out, again, how can you be more human? How can you use this machine to make you more human? One of the things that Seth said that really, something I want to emphasize again is oftentimes we are taught that the way these AI tools will help us is for us to prompt it to generate things. When in fact, as an artist, often the most productive thing you can do is to have the machine prompt you to do interesting things. So try to think in that direction. What can you get the machine to do to prompt you? Elena also made something in the same vein. Like, think about how this data, how can you use the AI as a new lens to look at the world, to inspire you to do things that only you can do.
Okay, so I just have a question for everybody, because this is like the more that I use the AI tools like ChatGPT, Claude, or whatever, and I'm writing my pitches, and I have to write 10,000 essays, and it has to be this many words, and then it has to be that many words, and I have to do the grant application, and it's like so annoying, and it's the bane of my existence, and I have this great idea, and I'm like using it to do all the things. And I'm like, okay, cool, let me see what happens if I tell it to be my social media manager and write all my captions for like the next month and whatever, and I'm reading them. And what this exercise allowed me to do, which I didn't realize would be the result of it, was that I learned like how it looks when ChatGPT writes a caption. Like I can like, so like raise your hand if when you're scrolling social media, you can tell if the caption was written by ChatGPT or like with a bot, or if the caption was written by the yeah, so does it make you scroll faster if you think it's written by the bot? Okay, so that's like a little bit validating, because I know that in the future it's going to get better and better, and we're all probably not, you know, whatever. I understand, but at least for this moment right now, like that's what keeps me going on a day-to-day basis, because I still feel like the more I know it, and like the more that I did try to use it to do my work, the more as the artist I realized that what it was doing was so repeatable, predictable, and exactly what I was seeing everywhere else. And that was what inspired me to kind of use it to see what it would write, and then go the other way, and then be like, okay, I'm gonna actually, you know, in the same way of like how I've always had to compete for jobs anyways, like, okay, well, I gotta distinguish myself somehow as an artist, right? If you're working in the creative field, you have to be able to figure out your niche as an artist that's marketable, like if you actually need to be able to make money off of it. So you're constantly going, okay, well, these guys are doing that, so I'm gonna go over here and do my thing, you know? So I think it's that same mentality, and that's kind of what has kept me like able to keep going. I guess.
I've actually done something very similar. Like, you know, when I'm asked to write an essay or something, I give the prompt to ChatGPT and have it generate a version, and I'm like, okay, great. So now I know what not to write. This is the stuff I have to avoid.
Can I just say too, in thinking about working with students, because that's my primary job right now, is working with students, aspiring artists. To borrow a phrase from the Center for Humane Technology, clarity brings agency. And I feel like that is the key for the next generation. I think as much as possible, I want them to be fully trained artists in the craft that I grew up in that tradition, but I also want them to be aware of where new tools exist today and can outperform them in this way or that way, and show them like not only like how to use the tools, but talk about how those tools work, all of the implications, both positive and negative for those tools, so that they have clarity on how they feel about that. Whether that's they want to like kind of pick up the torch of being an activist and fighting against it, if they want to lean wholeheartedly, knowing exactly what it's doing into it. I feel like we right now are in a moment where a lot of these big tech agencies that are kind of taking over the world generally, but especially in the arts right now, are thriving because they're controlling the narrative, and the narrative is just confusing. Right? They pitch this idea of a black box. You put an input into it, and somehow out of that percolates potentially art or whatever. And I think they thrive in that space of unknowing and sort of obscure, almost magic. Right? They can get away with stuff. And so I feel like the more we can be clear about what's happening right now, the more agency we'll have to change the future for the better of art.
All right, I'm going to skip over some of the questions that have been posted that are about AI in general, but focus on those that actually talk about art and AI. So forgive me if you asked the question that was generally about AI. Brief comment maybe from you, Elena, the question about policy, and the question was put, do you need to worry about copyright if you use AI? And related to that is, if you use AI to make art, is it your art or is it the AI's art?
I don't feel qualified to answer this actually, because it feels like legal outside my realm as a lowly user, but I appreciate the question, and if you guys have, yeah.
So I have looked into this extensively. So the current position of the US Copyright Office is that AI generated art is not human authored, and therefore not cannot benefit from copyright. So what does that actually mean? So this goes back to the whole discussion of craft. So permit me to be nerdy a little bit. For the longest time, whether photographs can be copyrighted was a question, because again, there was no craft, right? Then there was a very famous case in the US Supreme Court that established copyright for photographs. And if you read the discussion of why, it's incredibly interesting. This is the photograph of Oscar Wilde that became the first copyrighted photograph. And the reason it received that copyright was because, according to the Supreme Court, there's craft in the crafting of it. Therefore, there's an author. The human photographer was not merely pushing a button. The human photographer had to pose, to dress the model, to arrange things, to expose it a certain way, to basically control the final output in a way that is like an author. And the Copyright Office said, given current models where you just tell it to do something and it does something for you, that is not being an author. The Copyright Office basically took my position, which is giving notes to someone, telling them to do something is not the same thing as doing it yourself. That talking, prompt engineering, whatever that is, will never amount to actually practicing craft. And I 100% agree with that. So if you try to do AI-generated art right now, you are not going to get copyright protection. And I think that is the right result. However, in the future, and the Copyright Office agrees with this, depending on how these tools change and what degree of craft you can practice, if you can analogize yourself to the same position as a photographer in taking a portrait of a model, if you have that degree of control over the final result, the Copyright Office implicitly suggests that you can get a copyright, even if the AI was used as one of the tools. And I think that, in general, is the right position. Now, granted, the Copyright Office does not have the final word on any of this. This is always going to be up to the Supreme Court interpreting the Copyright Clause, and also up to Congress how they want to actually legislate this. But that's the general framework.
Let me get in there, because we're almost out of time. We have 4 minutes left in the session. I'm going to exert executive privilege and throw out an idea that maybe you have a brief comment on. So, Elena, you worked on a project called I Am Human, a film about how brain-computer interfaces are helping people with particular physical needs. I can imagine a future, and I think Elon can as well, in which the AIs are now coupled with our brains. What does that mean for art making?
Yeah, so I made a film about this. It's called I Am Human, and we were really interested in exploring early adopters of brain-computer interface technology, which at the time was very much happening for medical use. So, of course, the first scenario that comes into your mind is like a very Black Mirror scenario where we're all cyborgs and like the tech can read our thoughts and think, you know, whatever, and read our minds and all that. What's actually happening is a lot more medically interesting than that, in the sense that there are, for example, deep brain stimulation is something that is used on Parkinson's patients that have a severe tremor. There is actually a rod that can be inserted into your brain to turn off and on the electrons that cause that tremor to happen. So you can literally see somebody awake in a brain surgery having that tremor turned off and on based on that electrical current. Now, in the experiments to get to that point, there were times where they turned on electrical current and someone had a vivid memory that they hadn't thought about in a really long time. So we know that there's like really crazy potential stuff that could happen. I think that with our film, our position was that just because this technology could be used in such horrible ways didn't mean that it wasn't actually helping patients right now, today, and that both of those things were really important to keep in mind. And I do think that it's hard to imagine a future where we still have to like hold a telephone to do all of this stuff. Like it's going to be wearable, it's going to be in us, it's going to be intuitive and ergonomic. I don't know how long that's going to take to do. And there's a lot to think about. That's for sure. Yeah.
That's a great place to end because we're 1 minute out. I would like to thank our distinguished panelists, and I hope you get a chance to interact with them. Especially to thank you all for being such an interesting group of people. I don't know why we only give an hour to this. I can imagine a 3-day symposium on this topic, and we could go on and on. So yeah. There are little flyers.